Let me ask you something, and I need you to be honest with yourself right now. When you walk into a room, do people notice you? Or do you just appear? When you speak, do people lean in? Or do they look away? When you make a decision, do people trust it? Or do they quietly question it behind your back? Here's the brutal truth that nobody is going to say to your face. Most people are living their entire lives invisible. Not because they're not smart enough. Not because they're not talented enough. Not because they don't deserve to be seen. But because they never learned the one skill that separates people who command rooms from people who just occupy them. That skill is confidence. Not the fake, pasted-on smile kind. Not the, I watched a YouTube video and now I stand with my chin up kind. I'm talking about the deep, unshakable, quiet power kind of confidence. The kind that makes people stop mid-sentence when you walk through a door. The kind that makes people wonder about you before you even open your mouth. The kind that, if we're being completely honest, makes people just a little bit intimidated by you. And before you say, I don't want to intimidate people, let me stop you right there. Intimidation isn't about fear. It's about presence. It's about people recognizing, before you've said a single word, that you are someone who knows exactly who they are, exactly what they want, and exactly where they're going. And that is magnetic. People don't get intimidated by arrogance. They get repelled by it. What intimidates people? What makes them sit up straighter, choose their words more carefully, treat you with more respect, is a person who is completely, utterly, unwaveringly comfortable in their own skin. And right now, you're about to become that person. If you're listening to this right now, whether you're driving, working out, doing dishes, or just lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I want you to do one thing before this audiobook is over. Hit that subscribe button on Mindset Audiobooks, because what we build here, chapter by chapter, is not just a listening experience. It's a transformation. Every single audiobook on this channel is designed to rewire the way you think, the way you carry yourself, and the way the world responds to you. And share this with one person, just one, who you know is sleeping on their own potential. Because the right words at the right moment can change everything. Now, let's get into it. This audiobook is not a self-help pep talk. It is not going to tell you to believe in yourself and send you on your way. It is not going to hand you a list of affirmations to repeat in the mirror every morning while you half believe them and then go back to shrinking in every room you walk into. This audiobook is a blueprint. A 10-chapter deep dive into the psychology, the behavior, the mindset, and the daily practice of becoming someone whose confidence doesn't just show, it radiates. The kind that people feel before they understand why they feel it. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself, because it already fills the room. Here's what most people get wrong about confidence. They think it's a personality trait. They think some people were just born with it. The kid who spoke up in class without flinching, the coworker who walks into every meeting like they own it, the person at the party who seems completely unbothered by what anyone thinks of them. And they look at those people and think, that's just who they are. That's not me. Wrong. Confidence is a skill. It is built. It is practiced. It is chosen every single day until it stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like identity. Over the next 10 chapters, we are going to dismantle every lie you've been told about confidence and replace it with something real. We're going to talk about where confidence actually comes from, and it's not where you think. We're going to talk about the body, the voice, the habits, the inner dialogue, the boundaries, the relationships, and the moments that either build your confidence or quietly destroy it when you're not paying attention. We are going to talk about what it looks like to be the most intimidatingly confident version of yourself. Not so that you can dominate other people, but so that you can stop being dominated by your own doubt. Because here's what's on the other side of this audiobook. A version of you that walks into rooms and doesn't need anyone's approval to feel like you belong there. A version of you that handles criticism without crumbling. A version of you that sets standards, in relationships, in business, in life, and holds them. A version of you that people remember, respect, and yes, are just a little intimidated by. Not because you're trying to be powerful, but because you are. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Confidence Lie. Why everything you've been told is wrong. Let's start with the thing nobody talks about. The reason you might have tried to be more confident a dozen times before and it never stuck. It's not because you're broken. It's not because confidence isn't possible for you. It's because you were chasing the wrong thing. Since you were old enough to understand social dynamics, probably somewhere around middle school, maybe earlier, you received a very specific, very consistent message about confidence. From your parents, from your teachers, from every movie, every TV show, every motivational poster stapled to a guidance counselor's wall. And that message was simple. Believe in yourself. Sounds great. Totally useless. Because nobody told you how. Nobody explained that believing in yourself isn't a switch you flip. Nobody told you that confidence isn't a feeling you wait to arrive. It's a structure you build. And so most people spend years, sometimes decades, waiting to feel confident before they act confident. Waiting until they're ready. Waiting until they know enough, look good enough, have achieved enough. And that day never comes. Here's the lie they sold you. Confidence comes from success. Do well enough, long enough, and eventually you'll feel confident. Get the promotion. Get the compliments. Get the results. And then, finally, you'll believe in yourself. But watch what actually happens. Someone gets the promotion and immediately starts worrying they're not qualified enough to keep it. Someone loses 30 pounds and still won't wear the swimsuit. Someone builds a successful business and still freezes up when they have to speak in public. Success piles up on the outside, and the inside stays exactly the same. Why? Because they had the whole thing backwards. The real sequence, the one that actually works, the one that neuroscience and behavioral psychology and every legitimately confident person will confirm, is this. Action creates confidence. Confidence doesn't create action. Read that again. Or better yet, hear it again, because this one sentence is the entire reason Chapter 1 exists. You don't wait to feel brave before you act brave. You act brave, your brain registers the evidence, and then you feel brave. You don't wait to feel confident in a conversation before you speak up. You speak up, you survive it, you do it again, and then confidence builds. The psychological term for this is self-efficacy, a concept developed by psychologist Albert Bandura at Stanford University. And Bandura's research showed something that should fundamentally change how you think about confidence. The single greatest driver of self-efficacy is mastery experiences. Not praise. Not affirmations. Not visualization. Doing the thing. And living through it. Every time you do something that scares you, even something small, even something that doesn't go perfectly, your brain files it as evidence. I did that. I can do that. Stack enough of those experiences, and your brain stops treating new challenges like threats. It starts treating them like familiar territory. That is confidence. Not a feeling. An evidence base. Now, here's where it gets interesting. And this is what separates people who understand confidence on a surface level from people who build it at a deep level. There are actually 3 types of confidence. Most people only ever work on one. And it's the weakest one. Type 1. Situational confidence. This is the kind most people mean when they say, I'm pretty confident. They're confident at work, but not in dating. Confident with friends, but not in networking. Confident with people they know, but invisible around strangers. Situational confidence is real, but it's fragile. It depends on familiar circumstances. The moment the environment changes, it collapses. Type 2. Performed confidence. This is the fake it till you make it version. And look, it's not worthless. Research, including the famous Amy Cuddy power pose studies, does suggest that changing your physical posture can shift your hormonal state. standing up straight, taking up space, projecting your voice, these things actually do something to your internal chemistry. So performed confidence has value, but it has a ceiling, because deep down, you know you're performing. And other people, whether they can articulate it or not, sense the performance too. Something feels slightly off, slightly forced, and their instinct tells them, don't quite trust this person yet. Type 3. Core confidence. This is the one that intimidates people. Not because it's loud, not because it's aggressive, but because it's self-contained. Core confidence doesn't need external validation to exist. It doesn't rise when someone compliments you and fall when someone criticizes you. It doesn't depend on whether the room responds well or the pitch goes perfectly or the date says yes. Core confidence is built on a foundation of self-knowledge, self-acceptance, and self-standard. It's the quiet certainty of a person who knows exactly who they are, their values, their capabilities, their limits, and has made peace with all of it. And here's what that looks like in practice, because I want this to be real, not just theoretical. Think about someone like Serena Williams. Not when she was winning. Think about the years she was injured, criticized, doubted, told she was past her prime. There were seasons where the results weren't there, where the press was brutal, where people were writing her off in real time, and she kept showing up, not performing confidence, not faking it, but walking onto that court every single time with a bearing that said, I know who I am, and the scoreboard doesn't change that. That's core confidence. And you don't need Serena's talent or Serena's trophies to have it. You need what she built underneath all of that. The deep, practiced, non-negotiable relationship with herself. Now, let's bring this home. Because here's the part that matters most in Chapter 1. Understanding the enemy. The enemy of confidence isn't failure. It's not rejection. It's not even fear. The enemy of confidence is the approval addiction, and most Americans are hooked on it without even realizing it. We live in a culture that is extraordinarily, almost pathologically obsessed with how we are perceived. Social media didn't create this, it just made it hyper-visible and hyper-accelerated it. Every post is a performance. Every interaction is a data point. Did they like it? Did they respond? Did they see me and not say anything? What does that mean? We have outsourced our self-worth to the reactions of other people. And when your sense of worth lives inside someone else's response, you will never feel confident. Because you are always one ignored text, one unenthusiastic audience, one lukewarm review away from collapse. Here's the shift. Confident people, the ones who intimidate people with their presence, have made a fundamental decision that most people never consciously make. They have decided that their value is not up for public vote, that their worth is not determined by approval ratings, that they will not dim themselves to make other people comfortable, and they will not perform themselves to make other people impressed. They just are. Fully, consistently, unapologetically. And that kind of person, in a world full of people desperately seeking approval, stands out like a lighthouse in a fog. Not because they're trying to, but because stillness is rare, because self-possession is rare, because a person who doesn't need you to validate them is genuinely, electrifyingly rare. That is what intimidates people. Not aggression, not arrogance, not dominance. Freedom. The freedom of a person who is completely, unconditionally, non-negotiably okay with themselves. So here is your first assignment. Not homework, not a test, just an honest question to sit with as we move deeper into this audiobook. Where are you currently letting other people's opinions determine how you show up? In your career, are you holding back ideas because you're afraid they'll be dismissed? In your relationships, are you tolerating things you shouldn't because you're afraid of conflict? In public, are you shrinking, quieting, managing yourself to avoid standing out? Notice it. Don't judge it. Just see it. Because you cannot change a pattern you haven't recognized. And everything we build, across the next 9 chapters, starts right here, with the honest acknowledgement that the version of you who has been waiting for permission to be confident, their wait is over. We don't wait anymore. The groundwork is laid. The lie is exposed. The real work begins now. Chapter 2. The Psychology of Presence. Why some people command rooms without saying a word. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt drawn to someone, before they spoke a single word? Before they introduced themselves, before they made a joke, before they did anything to earn your attention? Something about them just pulled you in? Their posture, the way they held their drink, the way their eyes moved through the room like they owned the square footage, the way they seemed completely, almost aggressively unbothered by anything happening around them. And you thought, maybe without even putting it into words, who is that person? Now flip it. Have you ever been in a room where you were that person? Where people gravitated toward you not because of what you said, but because of what you radiated? Where someone came up to you afterward and said, I don't know what it is about you, but you just have this energy? If that's happened to you, even once, you already know what presence feels like from the inside. And if it hasn't happened yet, I promise you, by the time this chapter is over, you will understand exactly why it happens and exactly how to build it. Because presence isn't magic. It's not a gift. It's not charisma you're either born with or you're not. Presence is a practice. And today, we're going to break it all the way down. There is a famous study from UCLA. You may have heard a version of it before, but most people get the numbers wrong and completely miss the deeper implication. The research, conducted by psychologist Albert Mehrabian, found that in communication, only about 7% of what people register about you comes from the words you actually say. 38% comes from your tone, the pace, the pitch, the texture of your voice. And a staggering 55% comes from your body language. Your posture, your eye contact, your facial expressions, the way you occupy space. Now, a lot of people hear those numbers and think, okay, so I need better posture. And they stand up a little straighter for 3 days and then go right back to hunching over their phone. That is not what this chapter is about. Because here's what those numbers are actually telling you. Before you ever introduce yourself, before you shake a hand, before you say good morning, the room has already formed an impression of you. The people around you are already running an unconscious calculation. Is this person confident or not? Are they a threat or an ally? Do they know who they are, or are they still figuring it out? And your body is answering that question on your behalf, whether you've prepared an answer or not. This is the psychology of presence, and it runs so much deeper than posture. Let's talk about what presence actually is, at a neurological level, because this is where it gets fascinating. When you encounter a person with genuine, powerful presence, your brain does something very specific. Your amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for detecting threats, evaluating social hierarchy, and assessing trustworthiness, processes that person within milliseconds. Before your conscious mind has formed a single coherent thought about them, your ancient, survival-wired brain has already made a judgment. And what does it look for? It looks for congruence. Congruence means that everything a person is projecting, their posture, their eye contact, their tone, their energy, all lines up with the same internal story. When a person's body says, I am completely comfortable here, and their voice says, I am completely comfortable here, and their behavior says, I am completely comfortable here, the brain registers that alignment and translates it as, this person is safe, this person is credible, this person is worth listening to. But when a person says the confident words while their body is screaming the opposite, when they're smiling but their shoulders are caved, when they're speaking loudly but their eyes are darting around the room looking for approval, the brain picks up the mismatch instantly. Even if the person watching can't articulate it, they feel something is off. The performance isn't landing. The mask doesn't fit quite right. This is why performed confidence, which we talked about in Chapter 1, has a ceiling. You can fake the words. You can even fake the posture. But you cannot fake congruence, because congruence comes from the inside. So how do you build it? There are 4 pillars of commanding presence, and most people, even people who study confidence, only ever work on 2 of them. We are going to cover all 4, because leaving any one of them out is like building a table with 3 legs and wondering why everything keeps sliding off. Pillar 1. Physical anchoring. Physical anchoring is the practice of being fully in your body, not floating above it in a cloud of anxious thoughts, but actually inhabiting it. Here is something almost nobody talks about when they discuss body language. The reason most people have weak physical presence isn't laziness or bad habits. It's disassociation. When we're anxious, when we're insecure, when we're in an unfamiliar social situation, our nervous system pulls our awareness inward and upward, into our heads, into our thoughts, away from our bodies. And the room feels that absence immediately. The person who commands presence is grounded. Their weight is settled. Their movements are deliberate. They don't fidget because fidgeting is the body's way of trying to burn off anxiety that the mind refuses to acknowledge. When they stand still, they actually stand still. And there is something about that stillness that reads as authority in a way that no amount of gesturing ever could. A practical way to build physical anchoring is to practice what performance coaches call finding your feet. Literally, in any high-pressure situation, a meeting, a first date, a conversation where you feel outmatched, take one quiet breath, feel the ground beneath your feet, and let your weight settle. It sounds almost embarrassingly simple, but the neurological effect is real. It interrupts the anxiety feedback loop and signals to your nervous system. We are not under threat. We are here. We are present. Pillar 2. Eye contact calibration. Eye contact is one of the most misunderstood elements of presence. Most confidence advice tells you to hold eye contact like your life depends on it. Stare people down, dominate the visual field, never look away. And then people try that and come across like a serial killer at a dinner party. Real eye contact is not a staring contest. It's attention. When someone is speaking to you, the most powerful thing you can do is give them the feeling that they are the only person in the room. Not intense, uncomfortable staring, but genuine, unhurried attention that says, I am not monitoring the room for someone more important. I am not checking my phone. I am not rehearsing my next sentence while you're still finishing yours. I am here. Fully. That kind of attention is so rare in our distracted, notification-addicted culture that when someone offers it, it feels almost startling. People walk away from conversations with a truly present person feeling inexplicably good, often without knowing why. And they associate that feeling with the person who gave it to them. That is presence doing its work. Pillar 3. Voice ownership. Your voice is not just a delivery mechanism for your words. It is an instrument, and like any instrument, it communicates far more through how it's played than what notes are technically on the page. 2 people can say the exact same sentence, I disagree with that approach. And one person will sound apologetic, almost frightened of their own opinion, while the other sounds like an unshakable force of nature. The difference is not vocabulary. It's not even confidence in the traditional sense. It's pacing and grounding. Confident voices are slow. Not painfully slow, but measured. Unhurried. When you speak slowly, you are communicating something profound without using any extra words. My time is not so scarce that I need to rush. My thoughts are not so fragile that I need to get them out before someone interrupts. I am not performing for your approval. I am sharing what I know. Additionally, confident voices finish sentences. They don't trail off into questions. They don't rise at the end of statements as if seeking confirmation. If you have a habit of upward inflection, where your statements sound like questions, it is one of the single fastest ways to undermine your credibility in any room, and most people do it constantly without realizing it. Pillar 4. Emotional regulation as presence. This is the deepest pillar and the most powerful. People with commanding presence have an almost preternatural ability to remain regulated in high-pressure situations. Not emotionless. Regulated. When chaos erupts around them, they don't freeze and they don't erupt. They slow down. They absorb. They respond from a place of consideration rather than reaction. Think about the leaders in your life, in business, in sports, in your community, who you would describe as having real presence. Almost certainly, part of what makes them magnetic is that when things get hard, they get calmer. They are the eye of the storm. And everyone around them, consciously or not, gravitates toward that calm like it's oxygen. This is not a personality trait that some people are born with. It is a trained response. It is the result of repeatedly choosing, in small moments of daily friction, to pause before reacting, to breathe before responding, to ask, what does this situation need from me? Instead of, what does my fear want me to do right now? Over time, that practice becomes your default, and your default becomes your presence. Here's what all 4 pillars come back to, and this is the thread that ties this entire chapter together. Presence is not about projection. It is about reduction. The most magnetically present people are not doing more than everyone else in the room. They are doing less. Less fidgeting, less performing, less seeking, less reacting. They have stripped away all the noise that anxiety and insecurity add to a person's energy. The nervous laughter, the over-explaining, the constant subtle signaling of, please like me, please approve of me, please let me belong here. And what is left, in the absence of all that static, is pure, undiluted self. And that, in a world where almost everyone is broadcasting static, is absolutely, undeniably, unforgettably present. You don't need a louder voice. You don't need a more impressive title. You don't need better clothes or a sharper jawline or a more practiced handshake. You need to arrive, fully, completely, without apology, in every room you walk into. Because when you do that, when you stop performing and start being, people don't just notice you. They remember you. Chapter 3. Killing the Inner Critic. How to silence the voice that's been holding you back your entire life. Confidence is not a feeling you wait for. It is a structure you deliberately build, one action and one decision at a time. Presence is not a performance you put on. It is what naturally emerges when you strip away the anxiety, the seeking, and the static that most people spend their entire lives broadcasting without realizing it. You now understand the what and the why at a level that most people never reach. But here is the problem, and I want you to really sit with this before we go any further. You can understand every single thing we have covered so far. You can intellectually agree with all of it. You can feel genuinely inspired listening to this right now, and then put your phone down, walk into a situation that challenges you, and within 30 seconds, that familiar voice shows up. You know the one. The voice that says you're not ready for this. The voice that replays the most embarrassing moment from 7 years ago right when you need to feel strong. The voice that whispers who do you think you are the moment you try to step into something bigger than your comfort zone. The voice that has an archive, a perfectly curated, brutally efficient archive, of every failure, every rejection, every moment you fell short, ready to deploy at precisely the worst possible time. That voice is your inner critic. And until you learn how to handle it, not silence it forever, because that is not how the human brain works, but genuinely handle it, every other confidence tool we discuss in this audiobook will have a ceiling on it. So this chapter is about going to war with that voice. And winning. Here is the first thing you need to understand about your inner critic, and this might be the most counterintuitive thing you hear in this entire audiobook. Your inner critic is not your enemy. Stay with me, because I know that might sound insane given everything that voice has put you through. But the inner critic, at its most fundamental neurological level, was not designed to destroy you. It was designed to protect you. Your brain's primary biological mandate is not happiness. It is not success. It is not even confidence. It is survival. And tens of thousands of years ago, when your ancestors were living in a world of genuine physical threat, predators, hostile tribes, scarce resources, the brain developed a powerful negativity bias. A hair-trigger threat detection system that defaulted to worst-case scenario thinking because in that environment, the person who assumed danger was more likely to survive than the person who assumed safety. The problem is that your brain has not meaningfully updated that software in a very long time. So when you stand up to give a presentation, your brain does not register a career opportunity. It registers a social threat. When you approach someone attractive, your brain does not see a potential connection. It sees the risk of rejection, which to your ancient wiring feels disturbingly close to tribal exclusion, which once upon a time meant death. Your inner critic is your threat detection system on overdrive in a world that no longer requires that level of alarm. Understanding this matters because it shifts your relationship to that voice. Instead of treating it as the truth, instead of hearing, "Who do you think you are?" and accepting it as a verdict, you can start to hear it as a signal. Not a signal to retreat, but a signal that you are approaching the edge of your comfort zone. And the edge of your comfort zone is exactly where growth lives. Now, let us talk about what the inner critic actually does on a tactical level, because this voice is sophisticated, and you need to understand its playbook if you are going to stop letting it run your life. The inner critic operates through 3 primary strategies, and chances are you will recognize all 3 of them immediately. Strategy 1. Catastrophizing. This is when the inner critic takes a situation and projects it instantly to its worst possible outcome, and then presents that outcome as inevitable. You consider asking for a raise, and before you have finished the thought, the critic has already played out the full scenario. Your boss says no, you look ungrateful, your relationship with your team deteriorates, you eventually get passed over for promotion entirely, and 5 years from now you are still in the same position wondering what went wrong. All of that from a question you haven't even asked yet. Catastrophizing is extraordinarily effective at keeping people stuck because it makes inaction feel like wisdom. Why take the risk when the outcome is obviously going to be terrible? What the critic conveniently leaves out, every single time, is the equal possibility that the raise conversation goes well, or even that it doesn't go perfectly but you gain information, establish your worth in someone's mind, and build the kind of self-respect that comes from advocating for yourself. Strategy 2. Comparative diminishment. This is the voice that looks at everyone around you and uses them as evidence that you do not measure up. In the social media era, this strategy has become almost catastrophically powerful, because the critic now has an infinite, endlessly refreshing feed of curated highlight reels to use as ammunition. Someone your age is further ahead professionally. Someone with less experience seems more articulate in meetings. Someone who started their business the same year you did has 3 times the following. The critic takes these data points and constructs a story. Everyone else is doing better than you, which means you are behind, which means you are less, which means you should be smaller and quieter and more careful before you get exposed. What makes comparative diminishment so insidious is that it contains just enough reality to feel credible. Those people are successful. That person is articulate. The achievement gap is real. But the critic's interpretation of what that means about you, that is the lie. Other people's progress has absolutely no bearing on your value, your trajectory, or your capacity. Strategy 3. Identity labeling. This is the most damaging strategy of the 3 because it does not just comment on your behavior, it makes claims about your character. It moves from "that was a mistake" to "you are a mistake." From "that conversation was awkward" to "you are awkward." From "you failed at that" to "you are a failure." The moment the inner critic successfully converts a specific event into a permanent identity label, it has won, because now you are not just dealing with a bad outcome, you are defending against what feels like a fundamental truth about who you are. And most people, when they believe a negative identity label deeply enough, stop trying to disprove it and start organizing their entire life around confirming it. So how do you fight back? There are 3 techniques that are not just motivational suggestions. They are grounded in cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, and the neuroscience of emotional regulation. These actually work, and they work because they address the inner critic at the level where it operates. Technique 1. Naming and defusing. The next time your inner critic fires up, instead of engaging with its content, instead of arguing with it, trying to disprove it, or being crushed by it, simply name what is happening. Say to yourself, out loud if you can, My inner critic is telling me that I am not ready for this. That is it. That simple act of narration creates what psychologists call cognitive diffusion, a small but powerful distance between you and the thought. Instead of being inside the thought, drowning in it, you are suddenly observing it from a slightly higher vantage point. And from that vantage point, it is much easier to recognize it as a brain pattern rather than an objective truth. The thought does not disappear, but it loses its grip. Technique 2. Evidence cross-examination. Your inner critic presents itself as a judge, but it is actually functioning as a biased prosecutor. It only brings evidence that supports one conclusion. Your job is to demand the full case. When the critic says, "You always mess this up," stop and ask, "Do I actually always mess this up, or can I think of specific times when I handled this well?" When it says, "Nobody respects your opinion," ask, "Is that actually true, or can I recall moments when my perspective was valued and acted upon?" This is not toxic positivity. You are not telling yourself everything is wonderful when it is not. You are simply refusing to accept a verdict delivered on incomplete evidence. Real confidence is not built on pretending you have no weaknesses. It is built on an accurate self-assessment, one that acknowledges your genuine strengths alongside your genuine areas for growth, without dramatizing either one into something bigger than it actually is. Technique 3. Reframing the narrative with a compassionate mentor voice. This technique comes from a research concept called self-compassion, developed extensively by Dr. Kristen Neff at the University of Texas at Austin. And her research found something remarkable. People who practice self-compassion are actually more motivated, more resilient, and higher performing than people who use harsh self-criticism as their primary motivational tool, which directly contradicts the story a lot of Americans grew up with. The "toughen up, stop making excuses, pain builds character" narrative that is deeply embedded in this culture. Here is the practice. When your inner critic delivers its harshest verdict on you, pause and ask yourself, what would I say to my closest friend if they were in exactly this situation? Because almost universally, the answer to that question is kinder, more balanced, more genuinely useful, and more motivating than anything the critic just said to you. Then say that to yourself instead. This is not softness. This is strategic self-leadership. Because the voice you use to talk to yourself is the voice your confidence either grows or dies in. And a coach who only ever tears you down is not a tough coach. They are a destructive one. There is one more thing about the inner critic that nobody talks about, and it might be the most important point in this entire chapter. The inner critic gets louder right before a breakthrough. This is not metaphor or motivational poetry. This is a documented psychological pattern. The moment you are about to do something that will genuinely stretch you, ask the hard question, make the bold move, step into the bigger version of yourself, the threat detection system goes into overdrive. Because growth is change. And your brain, wired for survival and familiarity, treats significant change as a threat even when that change is everything you have ever wanted. So if you are in a season right now where your inner critic is screaming, if the self-doubt is louder than usual, if the second-guessing has reached a fever pitch, consider the possibility that you are not falling apart. Consider the possibility that you are right on the edge of something extraordinary. And the only thing standing between you and that breakthrough is your willingness to keep moving forward while the critic is still talking. Because here is what genuinely confident people have learned. The people who intimidate others not with volume but with certainty. They do not wait for the inner critic to stop talking before they act. They act with the critic still in the room. They just stopped handing it the microphone. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. Joseph Campbell. Your critic has been running the show long enough. It is time to take back the microphone, and never, ever give it back. Chapter 4. The body speaks first. How to use your physiology to rewire your confidence from the outside in. We dismantled the confidence lie, the backwards belief that success creates confidence rather than the other way around. We broke down the psychology of presence and showed you exactly why some people command rooms without uttering a single word. And in Chapter 3, we went straight into the darkest corner of the confidence conversation, the inner critic, and we exposed every strategy it uses to keep you small, along with the specific research-backed techniques to stop letting it run your life. But here is something I want you to notice right now, in this moment, wherever you are listening to this. How are you sitting? Or standing? Or lying down? Are your shoulders rolled forward? Is your chest slightly collapsed? Is your jaw tight, your stomach clenched, your breathing shallow and high in your chest? Or are you open, expansive, grounded, taking up the space your body was designed to occupy? Because here is what most people completely miss when they think about building confidence. They treat it exclusively as a mental project. They work on their mindset. They journal. They do affirmations. They try to think their way into a new version of themselves. And then they wonder why, despite all that internal work, they still walk into rooms feeling like they want to disappear. The reason is this. Your mind and your body are not two separate systems operating independently of each other. They are one deeply integrated, constantly communicating loop. And that loop runs in both directions. Most people understand that your mental state affects your body. When you are anxious, your shoulders tense. When you are defeated, your posture collapses. When you are confident, you stand taller. That direction of influence makes intuitive sense. But the direction most people ignore, the direction that changes everything once you understand it, is the reverse. Your body affects your mental state just as powerfully as your mental state affects your body. This chapter is about learning to use that reverse channel deliberately. And once you do, you will have a confidence tool available to you anywhere, anytime, in any situation. One that requires no preparation, no therapy, no years of inner work, just the conscious, deliberate use of the body you already have. Let us start with the science, because this is not pseudoscience or motivational fluff. This is documented, peer-reviewed neurobiology, and you deserve to understand why it works before you are asked to practice it. Your body and your brain communicate primarily through two channels, the nervous system and the endocrine system, meaning hormones. And the relationship between your physical posture, your movement patterns, and your hormonal state is far more direct than most people realize. Harvard Business School researcher Amy Cuddy, whose work became globally known after her TED Talk became one of the most watched in history, conducted studies examining what happens physiologically when people adopt expansive, open body postures versus contracted, closed ones. Her research suggested that holding an expansive posture for as little as 2 minutes produced measurable shifts in hormonal markers associated with confidence and stress response. Now, subsequent research has debated the specific hormonal measurements. Science is always evolving, and that is healthy. But what the broader body of research consistently supports, across dozens of subsequent studies, is the core finding. Your physical state directly and measurably influences your psychological state. When you move your body in ways associated with confidence, your brain begins to generate the internal experience of confidence to match. This is called embodied cognition, the scientific understanding that your thoughts and emotions are not purely products of your brain operating in isolation, but are shaped by the physical sensations and positions of your entire body. In plain terms, if you want to feel confident, start by moving like someone who already is. Now let us get specific, because general advice helps nobody. Here are the 5 most powerful physiological levers you can pull to generate genuine confidence from the outside in, each one grounded in research and immediately applicable. Lever 1. Postural expansion. Your default posture when you are anxious or insecure is contraction. Shoulders forward, chest collapsed, taking up as little space as possible. This posture is not neutral. It is actively communicating submission to your own nervous system, triggering a cascade of stress responses that make you feel more anxious, more insecure, and less capable. The antidote is deliberate expansion. Pull your shoulders back and down, not in a stiff military way, but in a settled way, as if you are letting them drop into their natural resting position. Lift your sternum slightly. Plant your feet at hip-width distance. Let your arms hang open rather than crossed and closed across your body. This is not about looking confident for other people. This is about sending a direct signal to your nervous system. The threat has passed, we are safe, we are capable, we are in control. And your nervous system, which does not distinguish between genuine safety and performed safety, will begin responding accordingly within minutes. Lever 2. Breathing architecture. Your breath is the most direct, most immediate access point to your nervous system that you have. And most people, most of the time, especially in high-pressure situations, are breathing in a way that is actively generating anxiety without realizing it. Shallow, rapid, chest-level breathing activates your sympathetic nervous system, your fight-or-flight response. It floods your body with cortisol. It narrows your cognitive field, making you reactive rather than thoughtful, impulsive rather than measured. It literally makes you less intelligent in the moment you most need to be sharp. Deep, slow, diaphragmatic breathing, belly breathing, where your stomach expands rather than just your chest, activates your parasympathetic nervous system. It slows your heart rate. It widens your cognitive field. It produces a physiological state that your brain interprets as safety, competence, and calm authority. Before any high-stakes situation, a difficult conversation, a public speech, a negotiation, a job interview, practice what researchers call box breathing. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, exhale for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts. Do this for 2 to 3 minutes and your entire physiological state will shift in a way that no amount of mental preparation alone can match. Lever 3. Deliberate movement speed. This is one that almost nobody talks about, and it is devastatingly effective once you become aware of it. Anxious people move fast. Not always physically, though that too, but in every micro-behavior. They speak quickly. They respond immediately. They fill silences nervously. They walk with urgent, slightly rushed energy as if they are perpetually running slightly late for something slightly important. Confident people move slowly. They pause before responding. They walk without urgency, not lazily, but deliberately, as if every step is intentional. They let silences exist without panicking to fill them. They are not in a hurry to prove themselves to anyone, because they are not operating from a scarcity mindset where every moment of silence or stillness represents lost social ground. When you consciously slow down your movement speed, your walk, your gestures, your speaking pace, your response time, 2 things happen simultaneously. Your nervous system interprets the deceleration as a signal of safety and shifts your internal state accordingly. And the people around you unconsciously register your stillness as authority, because rushed, frantic energy reads as insecurity while measured, unhurried energy reads as power. Lever 4. Facial expression as neurological input. There is a long-standing psychological hypothesis called the facial feedback effect, the idea that the physical act of smiling, even when you do not feel happy, can generate a genuine shift in your emotional state. The research on this has gone through several rounds of controversy over the decades, but the most recent high-quality meta-analyses consistently find support for a real, measurable effect. What this means practically is that your face is not just reporting your emotional state, it is also shaping it. When you walk into a challenging situation with a relaxed, slightly open expression, not a forced grin, but a genuine softness around the jaw, the eyes, the forehead, you are actively influencing your internal experience. You are telling your brain, this situation does not threaten me, and your brain, receiving that input from your face, adjusts your emotional output accordingly. The next time you feel your jaw tightening and your expression hardening before a difficult interaction, try consciously softening it. Release the tension in your forehead. Let your eyes be a little warmer. Feel the change in your internal state that follows within seconds. Lever 5. Voice calibration before you speak. Your voice is not just a product of your confidence, it is also a producer of it. And the way you calibrate your voice before and during high-stakes conversations directly affects both your internal state and the impression you create. Speaking quietly and quickly signals, both to your nervous system and to everyone in the room, that you do not fully believe you deserve the floor. Speaking too loudly or too aggressively overcorrects in the opposite direction and reads as compensatory insecurity rather than genuine authority. The calibration that signals real confidence is resonant and measured. A voice that comes from your chest rather than your throat, that takes its time, that drops in pitch slightly at the ends of statements rather than rising into uncertainty. Even when you do not feel confident internally, calibrating your voice to these parameters creates a feedback loop. Your ears hear your own confident voice. Your brain receives that audio input as evidence. Your internal state begins to align with what your voice is already projecting. There is a real-life example here that brings all 5 of these levers together in a way that is impossible to forget. Think about Barack Obama on a debate stage. Not his politics, but his physiology. When an opponent made a sharp attack, he did not respond immediately. He did not rush to defend himself. He took a breath. He let a beat of silence exist. He turned with unhurried deliberateness. He spoke from his chest, slowly, with that characteristic downward inflection at the end of each sentence. His posture never collapsed. His expression never panicked. Whether you agreed with his positions or not, you could not deny the presence. And that presence was not an accident. It was a mastered, practiced, deliberate management of physiology under pressure. You have that same capacity. Every single one of these levers is available to you right now, in your body, today, before you have done another hour of therapy, before you have achieved another professional milestone, before your inner critic has quieted by a single decibel. Because the secret that this chapter is built on, the insight that most people spend years missing, is that confidence does not have to start in your mind. Sometimes the fastest, most direct route to an unshakable inner state is through the outside of your own body. Stand differently, breathe differently, move differently, and watch, with genuine amazement, as your mind catches up. Your physiology is not just a reflection of your confidence. Used deliberately and consistently, it is the engine of it. Chapter 5. Boundaries are confidence. How to stop people-pleasing and start commanding respect. You know the lie that was keeping you stuck. You understand how presence works at a neurological level. You have the tools to handle the inner critic when it fires up at the worst possible moment. And you now know how to use your own physiology as a direct, immediate engine of confidence, available to you anywhere, anytime, in any situation life throws at you. But here is the thing about all of that inner work, all that presence, all that physiological mastery. There is a very specific way that people will test it. And it will not happen in moments of obvious confrontation. It will not always look like someone challenging you directly or undermining you loudly. It will happen quietly. It will happen in the form of a request you do not want to say yes to, but say yes to anyway because the silence feels too uncomfortable. It will happen in the form of a standard you set and then quietly abandon because holding it felt too hard. It will happen in the form of a relationship where you keep giving and giving and giving, waiting for the other person to finally recognize and respect what you bring, and that recognition never quite arrives. It will happen through your boundaries, or more specifically, through the absence of them. Because here is the truth that this entire chapter is built on, and I want you to hear it clearly before we go a single step further. Your boundaries are not a wall you build to keep people out. They are the most direct, most visible, most undeniable expression of how much you value yourself. And the people in your life, every single one of them, are not forming their opinion of your worth based on what you say about yourself. They are forming it based on what you allow. Let us start with the uncomfortable truth about people-pleasing, because most people who do it do not think of themselves as people-pleasers. They think of themselves as kind, as flexible, as easy to get along with, as someone who just does not like conflict and would rather keep the peace than make things awkward. And on the surface, those sound like reasonable, even admirable qualities. But here is what people-pleasing actually is. Underneath all those comfortable labels, it is a confidence deficit wearing a generosity costume. When you say yes to something you desperately want to say no to, you are not being generous. You are making a fear-based transaction. You are trading your own needs, your own time, your own energy, and your own self-respect for the temporary relief of avoiding someone's disappointment or disapproval. You are outsourcing your emotional safety to the reactions of other people, which is the exact approval addiction we dismantled in Chapter 1, showing up in its most common and most costly daily form. And what does chronic people-pleasing actually produce? Not in theory, but in real, lived experience. It produces resentment. Deep, quiet, accumulating resentment that builds underneath the surface of every relationship where your yes did not mean yes. It produces exhaustion, the specific, bone-deep exhaustion of a person who has been performing a version of themselves that does not actually exist, for an audience whose approval they cannot stop chasing. And perhaps most damaging of all, it produces contempt from the very people you were trying to please. This sounds counterintuitive until you understand human psychology at a fundamental level. People do not respect those who have no limits. They may enjoy the access. They may take advantage of the availability. But deep in their subconscious, they register the absence of standards as a signal that you do not fully respect yourself. And people who do not respect themselves are very difficult to respect from the outside. Think about the most confident, most genuinely respected person you know. In your workplace, your social circle, your family. Now ask yourself honestly, does that person say yes to everything? Do they bend their schedule, their standards, and their self-respect to accommodate every request? Or do they have a clear, quiet, unwavering sense of what they will and will not do, and everyone around them somehow just knows it? The answer tells you everything you need to know about the relationship between boundaries and respect. Now let us get precise about what boundaries actually are, because the word gets thrown around so much in American self-help culture that it has lost some of its sharpness. People hear, set a boundary, and they picture a dramatic confrontation, a big speech, a relationship ultimatum, a moment of high emotional intensity where everything hangs in the balance. Real boundaries rarely look like that. Real boundaries are quiet. They are calm. They do not require lengthy justification or emotional investment. They are simply the clear, consistent expression of your standards, what you will engage with and what you will not, what you will accept and what you will not, what you will give your time to and what you will not. And they are communicated not primarily through words, but through behavior, through consistent action over time, through what you do when someone crosses a line, not just what you say when they approach it. There are 3 types of boundaries that directly determine how confident you appear and feel in every area of your life, and most people have never deliberately thought about any of them. The first type is energetic boundaries, the limits you set around your time, your attention, and your emotional availability. These are violated every time you respond to messages at midnight because you are afraid to seem unavailable. Every time you take on someone else's emotional crisis as your personal responsibility to solve. Every time you give hours of your attention to people or activities that drain you, simply because saying no feels selfish. Energetic boundaries are not about being cold or unavailable. They are about recognizing that your energy is finite and precious, and that every yes you give to something that does not deserve it is a no you are giving to something that does. The second type is relational boundaries, the standards you hold in your personal and professional relationships about how you expect to be treated. These are violated every time you laugh off a comment that actually diminished you because calling it out felt too awkward. Every time you accept less effort, less honesty, or less respect from someone than you would ever give to them, and tell yourself that is just how relationships work. Relational boundaries are communicated through response patterns. When someone treats you dismissively and you respond with the same warmth and availability you always provide, you are teaching them that dismissiveness has no cost. When you respond differently, not dramatically, not aggressively, but with a quiet, calm reduction in engagement, you are teaching them that your standard exists and that crossing it has consequences. The third type is identity boundaries. And these are the deepest, most powerful, and most commonly neglected of all. Identity boundaries are the limits you hold around who you are and what you stand for. They are violated every time you change your opinion mid-conversation because someone pushed back and the discomfort of disagreement felt worse than the discomfort of abandoning your own perspective. Every time you downplay your achievements to make someone else comfortable. Every time you let someone define the narrative about who you are and what you are capable of without challenging it. Identity boundaries are what separate people who have genuine confidence from people who merely perform it. Because a person with strong identity boundaries does not need external validation to know who they are. They do not need your agreement to hold their perspective. They do not need your approval to take up space. And that unshakable sense of self that does not bend to social pressure, is precisely what intimidates people. Let us make this tangible with a real-life scenario, because this concept needs to live in the actual texture of your daily life, not just in theory. Imagine someone at work who consistently takes credit for ideas that are not entirely theirs. They present collaborative work as their individual contribution. They subtly redirect the room's attention away from your input and toward their own. And you have been quietly tolerating it for months because addressing it feels uncomfortable and you do not want to seem difficult. Most people in that situation keep tolerating it. They vent to friends. They stew in private resentment. They become gradually more withdrawn and less willing to contribute, which, ironically, makes them less visible and less respected over time. The person with strong confidence and clear boundaries handles it differently. They do not have a dramatic confrontation. They do not send a passive-aggressive email. They simply, calmly, and directly create a pattern of accountability. Speaking up in the moment to acknowledge their contribution, documenting their work more visibly, creating situations where the record is clear. Not from a place of anger. From a place of self-respect. From the quiet, unshakable understanding that their work has value and they are not willing to let that value be invisible. That is what a boundary in action actually looks like. Not a speech. Not a confrontation. A standard, consistently upheld. There is one final piece of this chapter that might be the most important thing we cover. The guilt. Because every person who starts building real boundaries will encounter it. The moment you say no to something you would previously have said yes to, a wave of guilt arrives almost immediately. Am I being selfish? Am I being difficult? Will they think less of me? Am I making things harder for everyone? Here is what you need to know about that guilt. It is not a signal that you did something wrong. It is a signal that you did something new. Guilt in the context of boundary setting is almost always the feeling of your old, people-pleasing programming encountering a behavior that contradicts it. It is the discomfort of change, not the evidence of wrongdoing. And it fades. Every single time you hold a boundary despite the guilt gets a little quieter. Not because you are becoming less caring, but because your nervous system is building new evidence. Evidence that the world does not end when you prioritize yourself, that relationships worth keeping survive your standards, and that the respect you earn by holding your ground is infinitely more sustaining than the relief you feel from temporarily avoiding someone's disappointment. Dr. Henry Cloud, one of America's most respected psychologists and the co-author of the landmark book Boundaries, puts it precisely. People with good boundaries are not people who care less. They are people who have learned that caring for others sustainably requires first caring for themselves without apology. Your boundaries are not barriers to connection and respect. They are the very thing that makes real connection and genuine respect possible. Every standard you hold, every no you mean, every line you refuse to let someone cross without consequence, all of it is sending one message to the world, louder and clearer than any words you could possibly say. It is the message that says, I know my worth, and I am not negotiating it. That message, delivered consistently through your choices and your behavior every single day, does not just build confidence. It becomes it. Chapter 6. Confident Communication. How to speak so people actually listen, remember, and respect you. You have dismantled the lies. You have learned to own a room before you open your mouth. You have tools to handle the inner critic when it tries to drag you backward. You understand how to use your body as a direct engine of confidence. And in Chapter 5, we drew the line that separates people who are merely liked from people who are genuinely respected, boundaries. And we showed you exactly how to hold them without guilt, without drama, and without apology. But here is the moment of truth. All of that inner architecture, the mindset, the presence, the physiology, the boundaries, eventually has to come out. It has to translate into the words you say, the conversations you navigate, the rooms you speak in, the moments where you are called upon to articulate something that matters. Because a person can have unshakable inner confidence and still lose the room the moment they open their mouth. Not because what they are saying is wrong, but because how they are saying it is quietly undermining everything their presence just built. Think about someone you know. Maybe a colleague, maybe a friend, maybe someone you have watched in a meeting or a social situation, who seems confident right up until the moment they start talking. And then something shifts. They over-explain. They hedge every opinion with, "I mean, this is just my thought," but they apologize before making a point. They ask for permission to have a perspective in a room where they should be owning one. And the room, which was ready to receive them, quietly closes. That gap between how confident someone feels internally and how confidently they actually communicate is one of the most common and most costly confidence problems in America today. And this chapter is going to close it completely. Let us start with the single most important concept in confident communication, because everything else in this chapter flows from it. The difference between someone who commands a room when they speak and someone who gets talked over, interrupted, and quietly dismissed is not vocabulary. It is not eloquence. It is not even intelligence. It is conviction. Conviction is the quality of speaking as though you believe what you are saying. Fully, completely, without the need for the room's permission to believe it. It is the difference between a statement and an apology for a statement. Between sharing a perspective and performing the act of sharing a perspective while simultaneously preemptively defending yourself against every possible objection. And here is the brutal reality about conviction in communication. You cannot fake it. People feel the absence of it immediately. When someone speaks without conviction, when their words say, "I believe this," but their tone, their pacing, and their body language say, "Please don't challenge me on this because I'm not sure I can defend it," the listener's subconscious registers the mismatch and produces one automatic, devastating response. Doubt. Not necessarily doubt about the content. Doubt about the person. If they do not seem to fully believe what they are saying, why should anyone else? So before we get into specific communication techniques, and we will get into very specific ones, the foundational shift this chapter requires is this. Decide what you think before you open your mouth. Not forever, not irrevocably, but for the duration of this conversation, this meeting, this moment. Form your position. Own it, and then speak from inside it rather than around it. Now let us talk about the specific communication patterns that are silently destroying people's credibility every single day, because most of these are so common, so deeply habituated, that people do not even notice they are doing them. The first pattern is called qualification flooding. Qualification flooding is when someone surrounds every statement they make with so many hedges, disclaimers, and softeners that by the time they finish the sentence, there is almost nothing left of the original point. It sounds like this: "I could be wrong about this, and obviously there are people who know way more about this than I do, but I kind of thought that maybe we should consider possibly looking at a different approach. But again, that's just my take, and I totally understand if that doesn't make sense." Now compare that to, "I think we need a different approach. Here is why." The content is essentially identical. The impact is completely different. The first version tells the room, this person does not trust their own thinking enough to stand behind it. The second version tells the room, this person has done the thinking, reached a conclusion, and is prepared to own it. You are allowed to be wrong. You are allowed to not have all the answers. Confident people are wrong regularly, and they handle being wrong with the same steadiness they handle being right. But they do not preemptively dismantle their own credibility before anyone has even had the chance to engage with their idea. The second pattern is upward inflection at the end of statements. We touched on this in Chapter 2, but it deserves a full examination here because it is so pervasive and so damaging. Upward inflection, also called uptalk, is the habit of ending declarative sentences with a rising tone, as if everything you say is a question seeking confirmation. My name is Michael. I've been in this industry for 10 years. I think this strategy could work. In small doses, in casual conversation, upward inflection is relatively harmless. But in professional settings, in leadership contexts, in any situation where you need to be taken seriously, it is one of the fastest ways to lose authority before you have even finished your first sentence. Because every rising inflection is unconsciously received as a request for approval, and people who are constantly seeking approval are not people that others naturally defer to or follow. The fix is deliberate and immediate. Record yourself speaking, even for 60 seconds about anything, and listen back. Notice how often your statements rise when they should land. Then practice landing them. Dropping your pitch slightly at the end of a sentence is not aggressive or harsh. It is grounded. It signals that what you just said was complete, considered, and not contingent on the room's reaction. The third pattern is the apologetic preamble. This is the habit of beginning statements with unnecessary apologies that frame your contribution as an imposition before it has even been heard. Sorry to interrupt, but I know this might be a stupid question, but sorry if this doesn't make sense, but every one of those preambles is doing the same thing. It is asking the room for forgiveness for the crime of speaking. And the room, whether consciously or not, grants that framing. It starts treating your contribution as something that needs to be tolerated rather than engaged with. Eliminate the apologetic preamble entirely, not by becoming abrupt or dismissive, but by starting with your actual point. The point is the introduction. The idea is the entry. You do not need to apologize for having something worth saying. Now let us talk about the affirmative skills, the specific communication behaviors that the most confidently compelling speakers in America practice consistently and deliberately. The first skill is strategic pausing. The most common reason people rush when they speak is that silence feels dangerous. It feels like a vacuum that someone else will fill, like evidence of uncertainty, like a gap that makes you look like you do not know what you are saying. And so people fill every silence with more words, faster, increasingly less deliberate words, until the communication becomes noise rather than substance. Confident communicators have learned something that transforms their effectiveness completely. Silence is not a gap. Silence is emphasis. When you make a strong point and then pause, really pause, let it breathe, let it land in the room, two things happen. First, the listener's brain has the space to actually process and absorb what you just said, rather than immediately reaching for the next incoming piece of information. Second, the pause signals that you are so comfortable with what you just said that you do not need to rush past it. You are willing to let it stand alone in the silence and be examined. That is the communication equivalent of walking into a room and not immediately explaining yourself. It is confidence made audible. The second skill is active perspective ownership. Confident speakers use language that owns their perspective without being aggressive about it. Instead of, I think maybe some people might feel that, they say, my view is. Instead of, there's a school of thought that suggests. They say, I believe. Instead of, some might argue. They say, my position is. This is not arrogance. This is clarity. Owning your perspective with clean, direct language does not mean you are closed to other perspectives. It means you respect the conversation enough to enter it honestly rather than hiding behind the passive voice of someone who is not quite sure they are allowed to have an opinion. The third skill is the art of disagreeing without dismantling. This is where genuinely confident communication separates itself from both aggressive communication and passive communication, and it is the skill that most Americans, conditioned by a culture of binary thinking and tribal argument, struggle with the most. Disagreeing with confidence is not about winning. It is not about being louder or sharper or more relentless than the other person. It is about holding your position with complete steadiness while genuinely acknowledging the value in theirs. It sounds like this, I hear what you're saying, and I understand why you see it that way. I see it differently, and here is where my thinking diverges. That construction does something remarkable. It demonstrates that you are secure enough to acknowledge another perspective without feeling threatened by it. That security, that lack of defensiveness, is itself a display of confidence that most people find deeply impressive and, yes, quietly intimidating. Because insecure people need you to be wrong for them to feel right. Confident people do not. They can hold their ground and honor your ground simultaneously. There is a dimension of confident communication that goes beyond words entirely, and it might be the most powerful communication tool available to you. It is the capacity to listen with the same confidence you speak with. Most people listen the way anxious people do, partially. While someone else is talking, they are formulating their response, monitoring the room, managing their own anxiety, preparing their rebuttal. They are physically present but mentally elsewhere. And people feel that absence. It registers as disinterest, as arrogance, as the subtle message that what they are saying does not quite deserve full attention. Genuinely confident listeners do the opposite. They are fully present. They make the speaker feel like the most important voice in the room. They ask questions that demonstrate genuine engagement rather than questions designed to redirect the conversation back to themselves. And the extraordinary paradox of this is that the person who listens most completely is almost always perceived as the most compelling presence in the room. More than the person who talks the most, more than the person who makes the wittiest remarks, more than anyone performing for the audience's approval. Think about the most charismatic people you have ever met. The ones who left you feeling genuinely energized and valued after a conversation. Almost certainly, the reason was not what they said to you. It was how completely they heard you. That quality, that gift of full, unhurried, genuinely interested attention, is one of the rarest and most powerful things one human being can offer another. And it is available to you in every conversation you have, starting today. Your words are not just information delivery vehicles. They are the audible expression of your confidence, your conviction, and your character. Speak like someone who knows what they think. Speak like someone who knows they deserve the floor. Speak like someone who does not need the room's approval to believe that what they have to say is worth saying. Because it is. You always were worth listening to. The only question was whether you were going to start speaking like it. Chapter 7. Confidence Under Fire. How to stay unshakable when life tests everything you have built. You have dismantled the original lie. You have built presence from the ground up. You have silenced, or at least learned to manage, the inner critic that has been running interference on your potential for as long as you can remember. You have learned to use your body as a direct confidence generator. You have drawn the boundaries that command respect without uttering a single aggressive word. And in Chapter 6, you learned how to speak with the kind of conviction and clarity that makes rooms lean in rather than tune out. And if this audiobook ended right here, you would already have more usable confidence architecture than 90% of the people you will encounter this week. But here is the problem. Everything we have built so far has been constructed under relatively controlled conditions. You have been listening, absorbing, integrating, in your car, your gym, your living room, without the pressure of a real situation actively pushing back against you. And the truth about confidence, the truth that separates people who build it temporarily from people who build it permanently, is that it is not proven in the quiet moments of self-reflection. It is proven when life hits you square in the face. It is proven when the criticism lands publicly and unexpectedly. When the plan you were certain about falls apart in real time. When someone you trusted dismisses you, undermines you, or challenges everything you thought you knew about yourself. When failure is not a hypothetical to prepare for but a reality you are standing inside of, wondering how you got here and whether you have what it takes to get back up. That is when everything we have built either holds, or reveals where the foundation still has cracks. This chapter is about making sure it holds. Every single time. Let us start with the concept that underpins everything in this chapter, because without understanding it, the specific techniques we are going to cover will feel like surface-level tricks rather than genuine structural reinforcements. The concept is psychological resilience, and it is not what most people think it is. Most Americans, raised in a culture that heavily romanticizes toughness, think resilience means not being affected by hard things. Keeping a straight face, pushing through without flinching, never letting them see you sweat. The strong, stoic, emotionally armored version of toughness that gets celebrated in movies, glorified in sports locker rooms, and quietly rewarded in workplaces across the country. That version of resilience is not resilience. It is suppression. And suppression is extraordinarily expensive. It costs enormous psychological energy to maintain, it prevents the genuine processing that allows recovery, and it eventually produces the kind of sudden, disproportionate emotional responses that happen when a lid has been kept on a pressure cooker for too long. Genuine resilience, the kind that psychologists like Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania have spent decades studying, is not the absence of being affected. It is the capacity to be fully affected and still recover. It is the ability to take a genuine hit, emotionally, professionally, relationally. Feel the weight of it completely, process it without being destroyed by it, and return to your baseline with your self-concept intact. And crucially, genuine resilience does not just return you to where you were before the hit. It returns you stronger, because every recovery builds evidence. Every time you go through something hard and come out the other side, your brain files another data point. I have been here before. This is survivable. I know how to do this. Over time, that evidence base becomes so dense that genuinely confident people do not just survive adversity, they approach it differently than everyone else in the room. Not because they feel less fear, but because their relationship with difficulty has fundamentally changed. Now let us get specific about the situations that most commonly test confidence under fire, because each one requires a slightly different response, and having that response ready before the situation arrives is the difference between handling it with grace and being flattened by it. The first test is public criticism or failure. This is the one that most people dread above almost every other social experience. Being wrong in front of people, being called out, having your idea rejected loudly, making a mistake in a professional context where people whose respect you value are watching. And here is what almost everyone does in that moment. They either collapse or they overreact. They either shrink immediately, over-apologize, and spend the next several days internally replaying the moment in excruciating detail. Or they get defensive, go on the attack, and spend the next several days trying to prove that they were not actually wrong in the first place. Both responses have the same root, an ego structure that requires external validation to remain stable. The collapse says, "Your criticism has confirmed my deepest fear about myself." The overreaction says, "Your criticism threatens my carefully constructed image and I must eliminate the threat." The genuinely confident response, the one that consistently earns the most respect in rooms where people are paying attention, is neither of those things. It is acknowledgement without collapse. "You're right, I missed that. Here's what I should have seen," said clearly, calmly, without excessive self-flagellation. Then moving forward. That response is almost shockingly rare, which is precisely why it is so powerful when people see it. It signals a self-concept that is stable enough to absorb a hit without needing to either crumble or fight. It says, "My identity is not on trial here. My decision was wrong. Those are two completely different things, and I am secure enough to know the difference." The second test is sustained self-doubt during a difficult season. This is different from a single moment of public failure. This is the longer, slower, more insidious confidence challenge. The season of life where nothing seems to be working, where the results are not coming, where you are doing the work and the evidence of progress is nowhere visible, and the inner critic has an almost endless supply of ammunition. The entrepreneur whose business is struggling after 2 years of genuine effort. The person rebuilding their confidence after a relationship that dismantled their self-worth piece by piece. The professional who was passed over for a role they were genuinely qualified for and now questions whether they were ever as capable as they thought. These seasons are not just painful. They are identity destabilizing. Because your confidence, if it has been built primarily on outcomes, will track the outcomes. When the outcomes are poor, the confidence collapses. Which brings us back, as it always does, to the foundation. Outcomes-based confidence is inherently fragile because outcomes are never fully within your control. Market conditions change. Relationships end. Decisions that seemed correct turn out to be wrong. If your sense of self-worth is indexed to these external variables, your confidence will be in permanent volatility, rising and falling with every result, never actually stable, never truly yours. The antidote is building what psychologists call process identity, deriving your confidence not from outcomes but from your consistent commitment to the quality of your effort, your decisions, and your character regardless of result. Not, I am confident because things are working, but I am confident because I know who I am, I know what I value, and I know I am showing up with integrity even when the scoreboard does not reflect it yet. This is not blind optimism. This is the deepest, most durable form of self-knowledge available to a human being. And the people who have built it, the ones who can go through genuinely terrible seasons without losing their fundamental sense of self, are the ones who emerge from those seasons with a kind of quiet authority that no amount of success alone can manufacture. The third test is interpersonal pressure. Someone actively trying to diminish you. This happens in every arena of life. The colleague who consistently talks over you in meetings. The family member who has assigned you a diminished role and enforces it subtly at every gathering. The friend who responds to your growth with skepticism, comparison, or barely disguised resentment. The stranger or online critic who comes at you with naked aggression designed to destabilize your sense of self. Most people respond to interpersonal pressure in one of two ways that both, unfortunately, give the other person exactly what they are looking for. Either they shrink, withdrawing from the dynamic in a way that confirms the diminishment, or they escalate, engaging in a back and forth that keeps them trapped in the frame the other person has set. The confident response to interpersonal pressure is non-reactivity from a place of security. Not the cold, calculated non-reactivity of someone suppressing their anger, but the genuine grounded non-reactivity of a person who does not need to prove anything to anyone in this particular moment, because their self-worth is simply not housed in this person's opinion. Think about water moving around a rock. The water does not fight the rock. It does not stop to argue with the rock about whether it should be there. It does not take the rock personally. It simply continues moving, fully itself, completely unbothered, going exactly where it was already going. That is how genuinely confident people navigate interpersonal pressure. They do not pretend the rock is not there, but they do not give it the power to change their direction. There is one practical framework for staying unshakable under fire that ties everything in this chapter together, and it comes from the work of Dr. Viktor Frankl, a Viennese psychiatrist, Holocaust survivor, and one of the most compelling voices on human resilience in the 20th century. Frankl observed something extraordinary in the most extreme conditions of human suffering imaginable, that between any stimulus and any response, there is a space. And in that space lies the most powerful freedom a human being possesses. The freedom to choose their response. In the context of confidence under fire, that space, that pause between what happens to you and what you decide to do next, is everything. It is the difference between reacting from your wound and responding from your strength. Between being driven by the situation and being guided by your values. Every time something tests your confidence, every public failure, every difficult season, every person who tries to diminish you, the practice is the same. Find the space. Take the breath. Ask the single most important question available to you in that moment. Who do I choose to be right now? Not, what just happened to me? Not, what does this say about me? Not, what do I need to do to fix my image right now? But simply, cleanly, powerfully, who do I choose to be? That question returns the authority to exactly where it belongs. Inside you, not in the hands of the circumstance, not in the opinion of the person across from you, not in the number on the scoreboard. It does not matter what you bear, but how you bear it. Seneca. Confidence is not the absence of hard seasons. It is not immunity to criticism, failure, or the deliberate attempts of small people to make you feel smaller. Confidence is what remains when all of those things have done their absolute worst, and you are still standing, still clear about who you are, still moving in the direction of who you are becoming. The fire does not destroy the person who has built themselves from the inside out. It just reveals how solid the foundation actually is. And yours, chapter by chapter, decision by decision, is becoming something that nothing and no one can take from you. Chapter 8. The Confidence of Identity. How to know yourself so deeply that nothing and nobody can shake you. Here is a question that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Who are you when nobody is watching? When there is no audience to perform for, no image to maintain, no role to play. When the titles are stripped away, the achievements are set aside, and the carefully curated version of yourself that you present to the world goes completely offline. Who remains? If that question makes you even slightly uncomfortable, if there is a beat of hesitation before an answer arrives, then this chapter is the most important one you have listened to yet. Because everything we build in this audiobook, every tool, every technique, every mindset shift, every boundary and communication strategy and physiological lever, all of it rests on a foundation that either holds or crumbles depending on how well you know the person at the center of all of it. Yourself. Let us start with what identity actually means in this context, because the word carries so much cultural baggage that it is worth being precise about what we are and are not talking about. We are not talking about your personality traits, whether you are introverted or extroverted, analytical or creative, funny or serious. Those are real and relevant, but they are surface-level descriptors, not foundational identity. We are not talking about your roles, your job title, your relationship status, your family position, your social labels. Those are contexts you operate in, not the person who operates within them. We are talking about something much deeper and much more durable than any of those things. We are talking about your values, your character, and your self-narrative. The three interlocking components that together constitute the kind of identity that makes a person genuinely, intimidatingly unshakable. Let us take each one seriously, because each one deserves it. Component 1. Values clarity. Your values are the non-negotiable principles that determine what you will and will not do, what you will and will not accept, what you will and will not stand for, regardless of external pressure, social incentive, or personal cost. And here is the thing about values that most people miss entirely. You do not choose your values by thinking about what sounds good. You discover them by examining what you have already chosen. In the moments when the choice was genuinely difficult, when saying yes to one thing meant saying no to something else, when nobody was watching and you still made the harder call. Think about the moments in your life where you felt most aligned, most fully yourself, most at peace with your choices regardless of outcome. What were you honoring in those moments? What principle was guiding the decision? Dig underneath the surface of those moments and you will find your actual values. Not the aspirational ones, not the ones that look good on paper, but the ones that are genuinely operative in your life. Now think about the moments of deepest regret. Not failure, not difficulty, but the specific ache of having compromised yourself. Having said yes when everything in you was saying no. Having stayed silent when you knew you should have spoken. Having chosen comfort over integrity in a moment that mattered. What were you abandoning in those moments? That abandonment tells you just as much about your values as the alignment does. Values clarity is transformative for confidence because it eliminates the single greatest source of internal anxiety that most people carry. The constant, low-grade uncertainty about what they are actually for. When you know what you stand for, decision-making becomes significantly cleaner. You do not have to negotiate with yourself every time a difficult choice arrives. You do not have to poll the room for their approval before you act. You already know. And that knowing, that pre-decided, deeply owned certainty about what matters to you, is one of the most powerful sources of confidence available to a human being. Component 2. Character consistency. Character is not what you do when things are easy. Character is what you do when things are hard, when it costs you something, when nobody would fault you for taking the easier path. And character consistency, the alignment between who you say you are and how you actually behave across different contexts, different audiences, and different levels of personal pressure, is what separates people who have genuine identity from people who have a collection of performances. Think about someone you know whose confidence you genuinely admire. Not their success, specifically their confidence. Almost certainly, one of the things that makes them magnetic is that they are recognizably themselves in every context you have seen them. They do not have a work version and a home version and a social version and a private version that are so different from each other that the people in each context would barely recognize the other's descriptions. They are just themselves. Consistently. Unapologetically. Without the exhausting energy expenditure of constantly calibrating their personality to match what each new audience seems to want from them. That consistency is not rigidity. Genuinely confident people are absolutely capable of adapting their communication style to different contexts, being more formal in professional settings, more relaxed in social ones. But their character, their values, their sense of humor, their way of treating people, their fundamental orientation toward the world, that does not change based on who is watching. And the reason that consistency is so confidence-generating is deeply neurological. Every time you behave in a way that is congruent with your stated identity, your brain registers a small reinforcement. Yes, this is who we are, this is what we do. Over thousands of those small reinforcements, an internal narrative of self-trust builds. You begin to know, with increasing certainty, that you can count on yourself. That when you say you will do something, you will do it. That when a hard moment arrives, you will respond in a way you are proud of. And self-trust, the bone-deep knowledge that you are someone who can be counted on, especially by yourself, might be the single most direct path to unshakable confidence that exists. Component 3. Self-narrative ownership. Every person walking the earth is the protagonist of a story they are telling themselves about who they are, where they came from, and where they are going. That story, your self-narrative, shapes your confidence more profoundly than almost any external circumstance, because it determines what you believe is possible for someone like you. The problem is that most people did not consciously write their self-narrative. It was written for them, by parents who projected their fears or their dreams onto them, by teachers who evaluated them at their most unformed, by peers who defined their social worth at the most psychologically vulnerable period of their lives, by a culture that assigns value to very specific and very narrow versions of success. And somewhere in that collection of external authors, a story got established about who you are and what you are capable of. Maybe the story says you are not the academic type. Maybe it says you are not naturally confident. Maybe it says you are someone things are always slightly harder for. Maybe it says you peaked early, or started late, or missed the window, or were not born into the right circumstances. That story is running. Right now. Underneath every decision you make, every risk you evaluate, every room you walk into. And if nobody has ever explicitly told you this before, allow this chapter to be the moment it lands. You are allowed to rewrite it. Not by pretending the difficult chapters did not happen. Not by constructing a fantasy version of your history that is conveniently free of all the hard parts. But by changing the interpretation of those chapters. By asking not, what does this say about my limitations? But what did this build in me? By finding the through line of your story that reveals not a person defined by their worst moments, but a person who has been in preparation, through every difficult, confusing, painful, character-building experience, for exactly the person they are becoming right now. That reframe is not denial. It is the most honest, most empowering, most deeply accurate reading of any human life. Because every genuinely formidable person you have ever admired has a story that, told from the wrong angle, sounds like a series of reasons they should have quit. Told from the right angle, it sounds like a blueprint for exactly who they had to become. There is a practical exercise that ties all three components of identity together, and it is one of the most clarifying things you will ever do for your confidence, if you are willing to actually do it and not just listen to the idea of doing it. Write 3 sentences. Just 3. The first begins with, I am someone who values. The second begins with, I am someone who consistently. The third begins with, I am someone who is becoming. Those 3 sentences, written honestly and specifically, not aspirationally, not performatively, but with genuine self-knowledge, constitute the beginning of a conscious identity statement. The kind of statement that a person with unshakable confidence could recite from their core at any moment, in any context, under any pressure. Because a person who knows those three things about themselves, with real clarity, real certainty, and real ownership, is almost impossible to destabilize from the outside. You can criticize them, and they hear it without collapsing. You can reject them, and they feel it without fragmenting. You can challenge them, and they engage without losing themselves in the exchange. Not because they are invulnerable, but because their sense of self does not live in your response to them. It lives in them. Here is where this chapter ends, and where everything accelerates. You have now built the 7 layers of genuine, unshakable confidence. The lie is dismantled. The presence is embodied. The critic is managed. The body is calibrated. The boundaries are drawn. The communication is sharpened. The resilience is forged. And now the identity, the foundation beneath all of it, is becoming clear, owned, and undeniable. But I need you to hear something before Chapter 9 begins. Everything you have built so far exists inside you. In your thinking, your body, your habits, your language, your values. And that interior work is irreplaceable. But there is one external factor that most people completely underestimate in its power to either compound everything you have built, or quietly, consistently, invisibly dismantle it. The people around you. Not in a dramatic way, not in a single devastating conversation, but in the daily, accumulated, almost imperceptible way that the energy of the people you spend the most time with either lifts your sense of what is possible for you, or subtly, steadily, brings it back down to match theirs. Chapter 9 is going to talk about something that the most confidently formidable people in America understand at a level that most people never reach. The relationship between your environment, your circle, and the ceiling on your confidence. And what we uncover there might be the most uncomfortably honest chapter in this entire audiobook. Stay with it, because the person waiting for you on the other side of that discomfort is someone you have not fully met yet, and they are worth meeting. Chapter 9. Your circle is your ceiling. How to build an environment that makes confidence inevitable. There is a force working on your confidence every single day that has nothing to do with your mindset, your habits, your communication, or your identity work. It is invisible. It is gradual. It operates so quietly and so consistently that most people never identify it as the source of why their confidence keeps hitting the same invisible ceiling, no matter how hard they work on themselves internally. That force is your environment, specifically the people inside it. This chapter is not about cutting people off dramatically or declaring yourself too good for your current circle. It is about something far more nuanced, far more honest, and ultimately far more powerful than that. It is about understanding, with clear eyes and zero self-deception, exactly how the people around you are shaping the confidence you are capable of expressing, and then making deliberate, courageous decisions about what that means for how you live going forward. Because here is the truth that this chapter is built entirely around. You cannot build a 10-level version of yourself in a 2-level environment. Not sustainably. Not fully. Not without a fight that you should not have to fight every single day just to maintain the ground you have already earned. Let us start with the science, because this is one of those areas where the research is so clear and so consistent that ignoring it is not a personal choice. It is a form of self-sabotage dressed up as loyalty. Social psychologists have documented extensively what they call social contagion, the phenomenon by which emotions, behaviors, attitudes, and even self-perception spread between people who spend significant time together, in much the same way that a virus spreads through a population. Not through dramatic influence or deliberate persuasion, but through the slow, cumulative, almost entirely unconscious process of proximity. Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler, in their landmark research published in the New England Journal of Medicine and later expanded in their book Connected, found that everything from happiness to obesity to smoking behavior to loneliness spreads through social networks up to 3 degrees of separation. Meaning that the emotional and behavioral patterns of people you have never even met, friends of friends of friends, are statistically influencing your own patterns right now. If that is true at 3 degrees of separation, imagine what is happening at 0 degrees. Imagine what is happening in your daily, direct, sustained contact with the people who make up your immediate circle. The person who consistently expresses doubt about big ambitions, whether yours or their own, is not just expressing an opinion. They are emitting a frequency, and prolonged exposure to that frequency recalibrates your own sense of what is reasonable to want, what is realistic to attempt, and what kind of person gets to have the things you privately dream about. This is not dramatic. It does not happen in a single conversation. It happens in the accumulation of 1,000 small moments. The joke that subtly mocks ambition, the "who do you think you are?" delivered with a laugh so it cannot be called out, the consistent absence of genuine encouragement when you share something you are building, the subtle social pressure to stay the same size so that nobody in the group has to feel uncomfortable about their own choices. Now, before we go any further, there is a distinction that this chapter absolutely requires, because without it, this conversation can too easily slide into something elitist, cold, or disconnected from the genuine complexity of real human relationships. Not everyone in your circle who challenges your confidence is a toxic person who needs to be eliminated from your life. Some of the people who are currently limiting your confidence are people you genuinely love. People who have been in your life for decades. People who, in many real and meaningful ways, have been good to you. People who are not intentionally diminishing you. They are simply operating from their own fear, their own self-concept, their own limited map of what is possible. And because they care about you, they map those limits onto you as a form of protection. Your mother who warns you that starting a business is too risky. Your old friend who gets uncomfortable when you talk about your goals because it quietly highlights the gap between where they are and where they wanted to be. Your colleague who responds to your successes with a subtle competitiveness that you have learned to navigate by making yourself slightly smaller in their presence. These are not villains. They are human beings doing what human beings do, operating from their current level of consciousness, their current level of confidence, their current story about what the world allows. But here is what is also true, and what this chapter requires you to hold simultaneously. The love you have for those people, and the genuine goodness in those relationships, does not obligate you to allow their ceiling to become yours. You can love someone completely and still make deliberate decisions about how much of your inner life you share with them, how much of your vision you expose to their skepticism, and how much time you spend in environments where your growth is quietly resisted rather than actively celebrated. That is not betrayal. That is self-stewardship. And it is one of the most important and most difficult forms of confidence you will ever practice. So what does a genuinely confidence compounding environment actually look like? Because it is not enough to identify what needs to change. You need a clear picture of what you are building toward. A confidence compounding environment has 3 specific qualities, and they are worth knowing precisely because they help you evaluate both what you currently have and what you need to deliberately cultivate. The first quality is honest encouragement, not blind validation. There is an important difference between people who tell you everything you do is wonderful and people who genuinely believe in your capacity and tell you the truth about your work. The first type feels good in the short term and is actively harmful in the long term, because it deprives you of the feedback that helps you actually grow, and it trains you to need applause rather than building the internal compass that confidence requires. The people who compound your confidence are the ones who say, "I believe you can do this," and "that specific thing needs to be stronger before you take it to the world." Both, in the same breath, from a place of genuine investment in your growth rather than management of their own comfort. The second quality is reciprocal ambition. Ambition, like doubt, is socially contagious. When you spend significant time with people who are genuinely building something, who have goals that make them slightly uncomfortable, who are willing to be beginners in pursuit of something meaningful, who talk about growth not as a performance but as a genuine orientation toward their own life, your own ambition rises to meet theirs. This does not mean surrounding yourself exclusively with high achievers in a conventional sense. It means surrounding yourself with people who are trying, authentically, vulnerably, consistently trying to become more than they currently are. That energy is one of the most powerful environmental inputs available to your confidence. The third quality is psychological safety without stagnation. The best environments for confidence are ones where you feel safe enough to be honest about your fears, your failures, and your uncertainties, but where that honesty leads to forward motion rather than commiseration, where vulnerability is met with encouragement rather than shared despair, where the group's response to someone struggling is, "What do you need and how do we help you move forward?" rather than, "I know, everything is hard, nothing ever works out." Safety without stagnation. The warmth of belonging combined with the forward pull of growth. There is one more dimension of environment that most people completely overlook, and it extends beyond the people in your life to the content filling your mind every single day. The podcasts you listen to, the social media accounts you follow, the news you consume, the books on your nightstand, the YouTube channels you spend hours inside. All of it is environment. All of it is either building your sense of what is possible or quietly eroding it. A person who spends 3 hours a day consuming content that emphasizes scarcity, threat, outrage, and limitation, and then wonders why their confidence feels perpetually under siege, is not experiencing a mindset problem. They are experiencing an environment problem. The inputs are producing exactly the outputs they are designed to produce. Audit your content environment with the same honesty you bring to your personal relationships. Ask, does this make me feel more capable or less? Does this expand my sense of what is possible or contract it? Does this add to my confidence architecture or quietly chip away at it? Then make adjustments, not dramatically, not all at once, but deliberately and consistently, until the environment surrounding your mind every day is one that a genuinely confident person would be proud to inhabit. Here is where Chapter 9 leaves you, and where everything converges. You have now built this from the ground up. The mindset, the presence, the inner critic management, the physiology, the boundaries, the communication, the resilience under fire, the identity at the foundation. And now, the environment that makes all of it sustainable. 9 chapters, 9 layers, and every single one of them pointing toward the same person. The version of you that does not just understand confidence intellectually, but lives it, embodies it, radiates it so completely and so consistently that people feel it before you have said a word. But there is one chapter left, and it is the most important one in this entire audiobook. Not because it introduces something new, but because it does something that all the knowledge in the world cannot do on its own. It brings everything together into the single, integrated picture of who you are becoming. It gives you the summary, the synthesis, the roadmap you carry with you after this audiobook ends and the real practice begins. Chapter 10 is where everything you have built becomes a life. Do not stop now. You are one chapter away from meeting the most confident version of yourself you have ever seen clearly. And I promise you, they are worth the next few minutes. Chapter 10. The Confident Life. Bringing it all together and never going back. Every great journey has a final mile. Not the easiest mile. Rarely ever the easiest. But the most meaningful one because it is the mile walked with full awareness of how far you have come, full clarity about where you are going, and full ownership of the person doing the walking. This is your final mile. 9 chapters ago, you sat down with a question. Maybe a quiet one, maybe a desperate one, maybe one you had been carrying so long you had almost stopped noticing the weight of it. The question of whether you could become someone whose confidence was real, deep, durable, and genuinely your own. Someone who commands rooms not through performance but through presence. Someone who knows themselves so completely that criticism lands without collapsing them, failure visits without defining them, and other people's opinions pass through without rearranging them. Over 9 chapters, you did not just learn about that person. You began becoming them. And this final chapter is where we make sure that becoming does not stop when this audiobook ends. Let us do something in this chapter that we have not done yet. Let us look back at the full architecture of what you have built, not as a review but as a recognition. Because there is a profound difference between knowing something and recognizing it as genuinely, permanently yours. In Chapter 1, you dismantled the foundational lie. the backwards belief that success creates confidence rather than the other way around. You learn that confidence is not a feeling you wait for but a structure you build through action, evidence, and the deliberate rejection of the approval addiction that keeps most people permanently small. That single shift, from waiting to building, was the first brick. In Chapter 2, you learn that presence is not performance. That the people who command rooms without saying a word are not doing more than everyone else. They are doing less. Less fidgeting, less seeking, less performing, less broadcasting the static of anxiety and insecurity. And that what remains in the absence of all that noise is pure, undiluted, magnetic self, which is something no amount of rehearsal can manufacture but consistent inner work absolutely can. In Chapter 3, you went into the darkest room, the inner critic, and you turned the lights on. You learned that your inner critic is not your enemy but your overdeveloped threat detection system, and that its volume is not evidence of truth but evidence of proximity to your growing edge. You now have 3 specific research-backed techniques to handle it when it fires up: naming and defusing, evidence cross-examination, and the compassionate mentor voice that Dr. Kristin Neff's research proved is more motivating than any amount of harsh self-criticism. In Chapter 4, you discovered the reverse channel, the profound truth that your body does not just reflect your confidence, it actively produces it. You learned 5 physiological levers: postural expansion, breathing architecture, deliberate movement speed, facial expression feedback, and voice calibration, that give you a direct, immediate, always available pathway to a confident internal state regardless of what your circumstances look like in any given moment. In Chapter 5, you drew the line that separates people who are liked from people who are respected: boundaries. You learned that people-pleasing is not generosity but fear wearing a generosity costume, that every standard you hold is a direct communication of your self-worth to everyone watching, and that the guilt that comes with holding new boundaries is not evidence of wrongdoing but evidence of change. Healthy, necessary, confidence compounding change. In Chapter 6, you learn to speak like someone who believes what they are saying. Fully, without the apologetic preambles, the qualification flooding, the upward inflection that turns your statements into questions seeking permission. You learn that strategic pausing is emphasis, that perspective ownership is clarity rather than arrogance, and that the person who listens most completely is almost always perceived as the most compelling presence in any room. In Chapter 7, you were prepared for the inevitable, the moments when life tests everything you have built. You learned the difference between suppression and genuine resilience, between outcomes-based confidence that tracks the scoreboard and process identity that remains stable regardless of the result. And you were given Viktor Frankl's most powerful gift, the space between stimulus and response, and the freedom that lives inside it. In Chapter 8, you went all the way to the foundation. Identity, values clarity, character consistency, and self-narrative ownership. The 3 interlocking components that make a person genuinely, intimidatingly unshakable. Not because they are invulnerable, but because their sense of self does not live in anyone else's response to them. It lives in them. And in Chapter 9, you face the most uncomfortable external truth of this entire audiobook, that your environment is never neutral, that social contagion is real and relentless, and that building a 10-level version of yourself in a 2-level environment is a fight you should not have to fight every single day. You learn to audit your circle, your content, and your daily inputs with the same honesty and the same standards you now apply to your own inner life. 9 layers, 9 chapters, 1 unbreakable architecture. And now, right now in this final chapter, we talk about what comes next. Because here is the truth about transformation that most self-development content conveniently skips over, and this audiobook is not going to do that to you. Understanding is not transformation. Inspiration is not transformation. Even genuine, emotional, goosebump-producing insight, the kind that makes you feel in this moment like everything is about to change, is not transformation. Transformation is what happens in the Tuesday morning when nobody is listening to an audiobook and nobody is feeling inspired and the familiar old patterns are right there, available, comfortable, requiring nothing from you, and you choose differently anyway. Transformation happens in the small, unsexy, unwitnessed moments of daily practice. And it happens slowly. Not in the dramatic, cinematic way that makes for great movie montages, but in the quiet, cumulative, compound interest way that real human growth has always worked. So the question this chapter needs to answer, the question that determines whether everything you have absorbed over the last 9 chapters actually changes your life or simply joins the long archive of things you once found interesting, is this: how do you take all of this from understanding into living? The answer has 3 components, and each one is non-negotiable. The first component is daily practice over occasional inspiration. Confidence is not built in the moments when you feel motivated. It is built in the moments when you do not feel motivated and you show up anyway. When the inner critic is loud and you act anyway. When the boundary is uncomfortable to hold and you hold it anyway. When speaking your truth risks disapproval and you speak it anyway. This is what daily practice means in the context of everything this audiobook has given you. Not a rigid, joyless routine of self-improvement exercises performed under obligation, but a genuine daily commitment to choosing the confident response, in conversations, in decisions, in the way you carry your body, in the standards you hold for yourself and your relationships, even when the easier choice is available and nobody would blame you for taking it. Pick one thing from this audiobook, just one, and practice it every single day for the next 30 days. Not all 10 chapters simultaneously. Not a complete overhaul of your entire personality starting tomorrow morning. Just one deliberate, consistent, daily practice. Maybe it is the box breathing before high-pressure situations. Maybe it is eliminating the apologetic preamble from every conversation. Maybe it is writing those 3 identity sentences and reading them every morning before the world gets its hands on your attention. One thing. 30 days. Practiced with genuine intention. And watch what happens to the rest. The second component is discomfort as a compass. Everything in this audiobook leads toward growth. And growth, by definition, requires you to regularly move into territory that feels unfamiliar, uncomfortable, and slightly beyond what you currently feel capable of. The person who avoids discomfort to protect their confidence never actually builds it. Because confidence is not the absence of discomfort. It is the accumulated evidence that you can move through discomfort and come out the other side intact. Every time you do something that scares you, your brain files it as evidence. Every time you hold a standard that was difficult to hold, your self-trust grows. Every time you speak your truth in a room that might not receive it warmly, your identity becomes a little more solid, a little more undeniable, a little more yours. Use discomfort as a compass. When something makes you uncomfortable because it challenges your growth, not because it genuinely violates your values, but because it asks something bigger of you than you currently ask of yourself, lean toward it rather than away from it. That discomfort is not a warning sign. It is a direction sign. It is pointing directly at the next layer of who you are becoming. The third component is patient consistency over urgent transformation. Americans live in a culture that is extraordinarily impatient with growth. We want the transformation now, the results immediately, the confidence completely rebuilt by the end of the month. And when it does not happen on that timeline, we conclude that it is not working, and we look for the next thing, the better approach, the secret we have not discovered yet. There is no secret you have not discovered. Everything you need is in these 10 chapters and in the daily practice of applying them. But it requires patience. Real, genuine, non-negotiable patience with the pace of human growth. The confidence that intimidates people. The deep, settled, unshakable kind that radiates without effort and holds without strain, is not built in 30 days. It is built over months of consistent practice, over years of deliberate self-knowledge, over a lifetime of choosing again and again to be the most honest and most fully realized version of yourself available in each new moment. That timeline is not a disappointment. It is a promise. Because every day of that practice produces a version of you that is more solid, more present, more genuinely confident than the day before, compounding quietly, invisibly, relentlessly, until the person looking back at you from the mirror one morning is someone you genuinely, completely, and without reservation recognize as formidable. There is one final thing this chapter needs to say, and it is the most personal thing in this entire audiobook. The confidence we have been building together is not ultimately about intimidating people. It never was. The title of this audiobook describes an effect, a byproduct, of something much more fundamental and much more meaningful than social dominance or interpersonal power. The reason genuinely confident people intimidate others is not because they are trying to. It is because they have done something that most people find both deeply admirable and quietly confronting. They have decided, with full consciousness and full commitment, to be completely themselves, to stop shrinking, to stop performing, to stop managing their light to fit into other people's comfort with darkness, to walk into rooms as the full, unedited, uncompromised version of a person who knows who they are, knows what they stand for, and knows without needing anyone's confirmation that they have every right to be exactly where they are. That decision, made once and then remade every single day in 1,000 small choices, is what this audiobook has been preparing you for. Not the confidence to dominate, the confidence to be. To be nobody but yourself in a world which is doing its best to make you everybody else means to fight the hardest battle which any human being can fight, and never stop fighting. E. Cummings. Before this audiobook ends, before you take out your earbuds or close this app or return to the noise of your daily life, there is something I need you to do. Not tomorrow. Right now. Make a decision. Not a vague, inspirational, I'm going to work on my confidence kind of decision. A specific, named, committed decision about one thing in your life that the person you were at the beginning of chapter 1 would not have done, but the person you are right now, after everything these 10 chapters have built in you, absolutely can. Maybe it is the conversation you have been avoiding for months. Maybe it is the application you have been too afraid to submit. Maybe it is the boundary you have been too guilty to hold. Maybe it is simply the decision to walk into tomorrow's most challenging situation with your shoulders back, your breath deep, your voice grounded, and your identity so clearly owned that nothing, no criticism, no rejection, no inner critic firing at full volume, can move you from the center of yourself. Whatever it is, name it. Right now. Out loud if you can. Because the gap between the person who listened to this audiobook and the person whose life it actually changed is not intelligence, or talent, or circumstance, or timing. The gap is a decision. And the most confident version of you, the one that has been waiting patiently underneath every layer of doubt, every accumulated piece of other people's opinions, every moment you chose smallness when you were built for something so much bigger, that version of you has been ready for a very long time. They were ready before chapter 1. They were ready before this audiobook existed. They have been ready every single time you stood at the edge of something that mattered and pulled back. They are ready right now. The only question that has ever mattered, is whether you are ready to let them out. Permanently, unapologetically, without looking back. Because the world does not need another person performing confidence. The world needs you, the real, complete, fully realized, unshakable you, showing up with everything you have every single day for the rest of your extraordinary life. Go be that person. Starting right now.